Well, through this period of Lent, this season before Easter is upon us, and we're talking about the church as the family of God. I want this morning to think about the call of God on the disciples, but I don't have time to go through all the disciples, so I've picked one as a representative story of God's call into inclusion in the family of God, but also into the work of building his kingdom. And so that's the story of Matthew. The story of Matthew is recorded in three of the Gospels. It's in Matthew, it's in Mark, and it's in Luke. But I'm going to read it from the Matthew version. So Matthew chapter 9, he essentially writes his own call story here, doesn't he? Here's what he says in Matthew 9, starting at verse 9. As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. And Jesus said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as Jesus reclined at table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to the disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when Jesus heard it, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but to call sinners." So this is a passage which is both, to me, inspiring and daunting at the same time. It's a story of a time when a man named Matthew was invited to follow Jesus. It's inspiring because, as we will discover, Matthew is entirely unqualified for this call. There's no common sense reason that Jesus should have chosen him, but he did anyway. The inspirational part is that if Jesus would choose an unqualified person like Matthew to be part of God's family, then there is hope that any of us can get in. But it's also a daunting story. Daunting because it removes our excuses for following Jesus. If Matthew is unqualified as he was to follow Jesus, if even he lent his skills and resources to the family of God, then certainly we cannot justify holding back ourselves. The stories of these early church disciples and apostles are not mere interesting curiosities for us. They're a template for how God interacts with people and how people interact with him. So the example of Matthew has to do with the way Jesus views him. Unqualified yet still invited. And it also has to do with how Matthew views himself. Unqualified yet still willing. It seems then like I must first defend the thesis that Matthew is indeed unqualified as a follower of Jesus who would then become a disciple and an apostle. I have to establish for you that he's unqualified. And to establish for you that Matthew is unqualified, I must convince you first that he was indeed qualified. And yes, you heard me correctly. I just said that I'm going to prove to you two exact opposite things, okay? Like trying to prove the chicken came before the egg and then turn around and say, no, the egg came before the chicken. So the question this morning is this. Why was Matthew qualified to follow Jesus? Then what quickly made him unqualified? Then why did Jesus call him anyway to become a participant and leader in the early church? And what's that got to do with us? Okay, that's where we're going this morning. To sort it all out, we have to understand God's mission in our world through his Son, Jesus. God sent his only begotten Son to be born of the Virgin Mary. What was the plan? Who could participate? The plan, simply put, was to eradicate sin from the human heart. It was not a plan to conquer nations or to make converts, spread a religion. The plan of God was to cure sin from the human heart and the world. Now, we could do a whole sermon series on what is sin. Simply put, sin is when me elevates myself above what? God, right? That's the attitude of sin. And it happens all the time. The Bible is a story of God interacting with the world and being met by rebellion at every turn. Rebellion when Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the Garden of Eden. Rebellion when Cain gave in to his anger and killed his brother Abel. Rebellion when the nations came together to build a big tower, and the pride at their handiwork into arrogance and rejection of God. Rebellion when King Solomon rejected God in favor of his lust for the women around him. Rebellion when the people of Israel, then the people of Judah, began to chase after other gods out of envy of their cultures. Rebellion when they took Jesus, the Son of God, and him on the cross. Rebellion when a measurable statistic of Canadians believe that there is no God. Imagine the arrogance when Canadians demand that God prove himself to us. That's arrogant. So sin is rampant in the human heart. It's a biblical story. It's a history story. It's a today's story. And Jesus came to solve that issue. He taught that there is confession and forgiveness of sins, and then there is hope of a new life where we do not have to fall back into those old ways. Be forgiven of sin, he said, and let God reign in your heart. Now, that agenda is for all people across all human history, but first, Jesus went to the Hebrew people of God. You recall the story when Jesus went to talk to Canaanite woman who approached him, this Canaanite woman. She asked that her daughter be freed from a demon. But Jesus said, it's not right that I help you because I've been sent to who? I've been sent first to the lost sheep of Israel. That's what he said to her. She wasn't of those people. She was a Canaanite. In the end, he did help her, of course, but the point is made. His first mission was to bring repentance to the Old Testament people of God. He said so directly to that woman who was part of that Canaanite group and culture. Now, if Jesus' mission was to bring repentance to the Hebrew people of God, then it makes perfect sense that Matthew would be recruited as a helper. We know this because his name and his geographer. Matthew was not his only name. You probably know this already, but in the Gospel of Mark and in the Gospel of Luke, both of this same story. Jesus walked past, and there was a guy sitting at the tax booth, and Jesus called him and said, "Come and follow me." In the book of Matthew, the guy's name is Matthew. The book of Mark and the book of Luke, what's his name? Levi. So either he had two names, Matthew Levi, or Levi Matthew something, which is quite possible for that era of human history. Or maybe he changed the name. Once he began to follow Jesus, changed from Levi to Matthew. That's a possibility as well. Whichever is true, his name was at least in part Levi. Levi is a significant name with a powerful history. In the Old Testament, Abraham was made a promise by God that God would give him land and descendants and blessing, and set him up an example of what it means to live in faithful relationship with Almighty God. God made that promise to Abraham. He an example to all the people of the world. And then that promise extended from Abraham to his son Isaac and to his grandson Jacob. But Jacob, he had 13 children. Well, 13 descendants. 12 sons, but 13 descendants, including his grandsons. So now the promised land had to be split up among these 13 descendants. And so God declared that a portion of the original promise to be divided out to 12 of those descendants. And they are known as the 12 tribes of Israel in the Old Testament. But there were 13 descendants. Who was left out? It was Levi. The tribe and descendants of Levi would inherit no land at all in Israel. They were let out of the promise of land. Not because they had done something wrong, but because God was actually calling them to a privileged place. The Levites will no title to any land, but rather would be the group that's in charge of what? Do you know? Do you remember? Yes. They're in charge with watching over the administration and the care of the tabernacle and the temple. The tabernacle was the tent, right, that went with them as they wandered in the desert. And the temple was the building in Jerusalem. Matthew's other name, Levi, carries with it a profound history of God's call upon his people to do his work. The Levites worked directly for God in his temple. Nor was Matthew from some other country. He was not from Greece. He was not from Rome. He was not from Syria. He was from Egypt. He was born and raised in Israel, presently living in the northern Galilee area, and working a job that only a Hebrew person was qualified for. Hebrew by name, Hebrew by geography, Hebrew by vocation. In other words, qualified to assist Jesus in his mission of bringing repentance to the Hebrew people. He was, after all, one of them, even a namesake of them. But Matthew is not qualified because as a Hebrew person, he has taken on the role of a traitor. Okay? Is he a traitor? Well, he is a tax collector. Now, this is not like someone who works at Revenue Canada. We may not enjoy paying taxes, but we know that ultimately our taxes go to the things that benefit us, our families, and our society. The schools we send our children to, we drive on, the medical system we rely on, social assistance that helps the unfortunate. And no, I'm not naive about taxes and whether or not every dollar is spent as it should be. But in the big picture, our taxes fund the administration of our own country, province, and city. Not so for Hebrew people in this day. Matthew was a tax collector, but not a Hebrew government employee working in the revenue department. They're not taxes for the Hebrew government or the temple tax system. These taxes were collected for a foreign government. Which one? Rome. Rome was the global superpower in the area, and for some 200 years by the time Matthew was born, Rome had occupied Israel. And Rome was interested in doing things as easily and cheaply as they could. So whenever Rome conquered a territory, it was their desire to leave locals in charge as much as they could and simply harvest the tax revenue out of the region. That's what Rome was interested in. The tax collectors then were not employees of Rome or citizens of Rome. Instead, they were locals who bid on a contract. Here's how it worked. Rome would parcel out a territory, separating out the cities and the regions of the city, and the town, and the rural areas, and the counties, and all those different regions. They would parcel that out and open it up for bidding. Tax collectors would assess what they thought they could collect from an area, and they would bid on the job to be the tax collector for that area. Whoever promised to collect the most for Rome would win the contract for that region. Now, it's bad enough that a local person would collect taxes from his peers to send off for the wealth of a foreign government, but even worse, the tax collector, once he had signed a contract with the Roman government, was only obliged to pay that amount to Rome. He was then free to collect as much taxes as he wanted, send this much to Rome, keep the rest for himself. That's how it was lucrative. Promise Rome this much, but collect this much and keep the balance for yourself. So not only were tax collectors generating revenue from their peers for the wealth of a foreign government, but they were also ripping off their own countrymen in the process, getting personally rich while everyone else suffered. It's hard to overstate just how disliked was the tax collector of the Hebrew people. More than disliked, more than snubbed, more than ostracized, they were reviled. If then you were going to begin a kind of organized faction, and if that faction would be primarily aimed at the Hebrew people, to entice them to follow a leader, then can you think of anyone worse to recruit than a Hebrew tax collector who is collecting revenue for Rome? But when Jesus looked at Matthew, he still said, Come, follow me. Matthew was unqualified. He had no credibility. Matthew had no standing or status within his community and among his countrymen. Matthew had zero respect or prominence in the eyes of anyone who was in charge. The Pharisees did not like his ilk. Neither did Sadducees, neither did scribes, neither did the teachers of the law, neither did the priests, neither did the Sanhedrin, neither did the chief priest. All would be in harsh vocal opposition to anyone who collected taxes of Rome. Even the Levites who took care of the administration of the temple and the temple artifacts, imagine the Levites finding out that a guy named Levi was working for Rome and collecting taxes for them. Has he no shame? He's a blemish on our name and to our reputation. But Jesus did not consider Matthew's standing. Jesus saw past Matthew's history and imagined what he could become. If Matthew heard about repentance, if Matthew saw the lame healed, if Matthew witnessed renewed hope that went beyond religious practice, if Matthew saw the great power combined with humble servant in the person of Jesus, if Matthew could see those things, then perhaps Matthew would become a champion of the things of God. Jesus was not calling Matthew to be a more honest or better tax collector, more fair. There's plenty of tax collectors out there. Nor is Jesus calling Matthew to get back to his traditional roots of Hebrew spirituality. You're a Levite, so live to the code. He's never asked him to do that. Instead, Jesus said, follow me. It was a mission of repentance and forgiveness and renewed relationship with God. And Jesus saw a man worthy to be invited into the world of redemption. I wonder what other people sign Matthew. In fact, we don't have to wonder. Look at 10 and 11. Matthew had organized this dinner party for Jesus right after, right? As Jesus reclined at the table, Matthew 9, verse 10, Jesus reclined in the house. Behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, Why did teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? To the Pharisees and to others in acceptable society, Matthew was a sinner, a tax collecting traitor, and not worthy of respectable company. What does your teacher, people like Matthew, these tax collectors and sinners? One who is respected should not be tarnished by proximity to these people. But Jesus saw something else in Matthew. You know, each summer in Saskatchewan, our town ran a weekend fair. And every other year, they had a lumberjack competition. You ever been one of these lumberjack competitions at a fair? These guys are phenomenal. They would claim this big tree trunk, and they go up, I don't know what it was, 40 feet in the something like that, and they'd zip up that with their, you see, with their rope and with their spurs on their feet, and they right up there and ring the bell and back down and get really tight with their spikes as they're coming down. It's almost a free fall. And they do other things too. They axe throwing. That ought to be nervous, because you're at a public fair. They're up on this stage. The target there, and behind them is people walking around. They miss, but they never did miss. They're always hitting that target. They log rolling, right? The logs are in the water, and they're balanced on the log, and they're rolling logs in the water, and they'd have a competition. The two of them would be on the log and trying to roll one another off. Yep. They're seeing who can chop through the wood fastest, or saw. They used hand saws to through the logs as well. You've done that? Yeah, they called you up from the audience. Oh, yeah, in your own audience. They did that when they did the signing. And had somebody come up for the audience and match one of the lumberjacks and another audience member with another one, and they saw who could get through the log the fastest. They did all these things, but they showed off their skill with a chainsaw. And the one guy, he took a log, just the size of an oversized non-split piece of firewood, and he set it up on the stage there, and he took a chainsaw, started up, and he started cutting. Cut off a piece here, wood chips go flying. Cut another piece there, he cut a V, turned it upside down, cut some more, finally the last cut, and then he held up his creation. It only took him 45 seconds. About a dozen cuts he did and fit in 45 seconds, and the guy made a chair out of a log. Rudimentary looking, but an actual working chair. All one piece. It had four legs, it had a seat, it had a back, it even had a little design etched in the back of the backrest. He made that with his chainsaw out of a log. Before he started his chainsaw, what did all of us in the audience see on the stage beside him? We saw a log. But when he grabbed a chainsaw and looked, what did he see? He saw a chair. Jesus looked at Matthew and saw beyond past. He saw past his present. He saw on toward what Matthew could become as a child of God and a minister of the gospel of reconciliation. And so he said, Matthew, come follow me. It's the same way that you... Oh my goodness. What are you feeding that kid? Is there bones in that or what? Why? There's people watching this on YouTube. They're going to wonder what just happened over here in the corner. A child cough really is all you to know. That's how we all got in the church, same way as Matthew. God knows who you are, but still did not lit against you. Right? Essentially. He calls you out of your past. He calls you out of your weakness. Out of your reputation. Into his family. Into his kingdom. And into the work of forgiveness of sins. In the body of which Jesus is the head, called the church, which is the family of God. Regardless of what anyone else thinks of you, the call of Jesus is an invitation. Come and follow. However you understand God, he only makes sense if you understand this invitational nature of his Son, Jesus Christ. The one who sees potential in you. It's the inspirational piece of the Matthew story. But then I also have always stood challenged by Matthew's response. You think Matthew was unaware of his reputation? When he took on the role of tax collector, was he naive? Did he think, oh, be respected as a tax collector in my community? Is that he thought? This is just a job, innocent little job that I will take on to earn money for myself and for my household. Is that what was going through Matthew's mind? Or was he perfectly aware of the reputation that came along with the role? Matthew notices the side way it looks. He hears chatter behind his back. He knows the light he has gotten himself into. When he goes at the dinner party for Jesus afterward, his friends are who? Other tax collectors and sinners. The kind of people who have no other social options, why they are all together. There's nowhere else to go. There's no one else who will hang out with them. That's Matthew, and Matthew was well aware of it. Matthew knows something else too. Not only does Matthew know his reputation, the size of society, Matthew also knows Jesus' reputation. Have you ever noticed that the story of Matthew's call in the Gospel of Mark happens early on? The call of Matthew, Mark calls him Levi, right? In the call of Levi in the book of, that's in chapter 2. When Matthew is in the Gospel of Jesus, where does Matthew place his own call story? What chapter? Chapter 9. Mark put it early on, chapter 2. Matthew put later, chapter 9. Why? My guess is that Matthew wants to emphasize how much was already known about Jesus' history before he himself called into it. The Sermon on the Mount had already happened. That was before the Matthew story. The baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist, that had already happened. The man who was forgiven sins and also healed, the one that was let down the roof, story had already happened. Healings, casting out demons, even the calming of the storm, all that had happened before Matthew writes his own story. If all that was Jesus' reputation, and Matthew knew very well his own standing among his own countrymen, how inadequate do you think Matthew must have felt to follow this man, Jesus? Jesus has already done these things, and this who I am. Does he see himself as worthy, as a worthy participant? Jesus comes up to him. Come, follow me. Who, me? Are you sure? Do you know, Jesus, who I am? Do you know all of my faults? Do you know all my frailties, all my flaws? Do you know my reputation? Do you know my limits? Because if you knew all these things, Lord, then you certainly will not pick me to follow you. I will not make a good representative. But that's what Jesus does call him to represent Christ to others. There is, in fact, nobody who should feel worthy to represent God and his Son in his church. There is nobody who can represent God except for the Son himself. The rest of us are just a poor imitation. But then lies the challenge. Matthew knew himself, and Matthew knew Jesus' mission. And when Jesus said, follow me, Matthew resisted to say, no, you want me, I'm not good enough. Here's the reason why I can't. Here's the reason why I should not. Here are the reasons why someone else would be better suited. Instead of excuses, Matthew had trust. He trusted that if Jesus called, Jesus would also equip. And in the end, Matthew's is a story of great success on multiple levels. He was redeemed himself, called out of his old life, forgiven of his sin, and welcomed into the family of God. It's a story of personal redemption and salvation. Matthew was a witness to the works of Jesus and was trustworthy with that story. Matthew also planted churches, at least tradition maintains he did that work. It's lost to history exactly where Matthew went and what he did after the book of Acts is over. Church history and tradition suggests that he did plant churches. But he also wrote down the story of Jesus, and in such a compelling way that it made it into our scriptures, the Bible. And because of Matthew, because he said, yeah, I will follow, and because he looked past his faults and his frailties and trusted when Jesus called him, now we have the story before our eyes. I believe this very strongly, that Jesus sees potential in you, part of his family, and to build kingdom. Church has a dual mandate: to care for one another and to make disciples of all the world. And there are so many parts to play this work that there is guaranteed to be some role that you can fill. And Jesus sees potential in you as he saw in Matthew. And like Matthew, each one of us needs to decide, are we willing to see beyond the reasons we are unqualified, instead decide to trust him and follow anyway? Amen.